you don't have to be a genius to see the relationship of the 8 also in this parsha to the story of Hanukkah. Because of course Hanukkah is also 8 days, symbolizing the same concept. Right? We use the oil as the symbol of this, how the oil, right, burned, enough oil for 1 day, burnt for 8 days. That is to say that it's beyond nature. Nature says that if you make a fire, it'll consume so much oil. It didn't. Right? It consumed much less oil. Why did it do that? Because it was not the laws of nature. It was beyond nature. It was the number 8. Right? It was symbolic of the same thing. The point being that when we talk about the holiday of Chanuka, we also have to realize that we have all of these things going on in the world, and one has a direct relationship with the other. Just like it is in the story, that one ties into the next. This and this and this, and what happened in the beginning has relationship to the end. It's not on the outside. The lesson of Hanukkah is clearly that the Greeks wanted to take the Jews and wanted to make them not Jewish. They didn't want to kill them. They wanted to change them. So they should not be Jews. They should be Greeks. And they'd be good taxpayers. They would follow the ways of the Greeks. They would be loyal, right? And they wanted that. The Jews didn't want to do that. What is the difference between a Jew who's alive, who's Jewish, and a Jew who's alive who's not Jewish? Is his soul. It's not anything physical. The Jew is the same person physically, and I haven't changed. The Greeks did not want to kill our bodies. They wanted to kill our soul. So the soul, of course, is the same concept of the idea of being beyond nature, of being something that is totally spiritual, something beyond the norm. And therefore you see again how the number 8 fits into Hanukkah. The idea with the story of Hanukkah being similar to this story is that we see how the relationships of what someone does has the ability to continue and to have large ramifications. While when Yosef told his brother the stories that he told his brothers caused the end result would be that they went down to Egypt. Right? That was the end result of it. So too, that the actions of the Jews who got themselves involved with the Greeks and became more and more Greek, eventually they became the majority. And the Greeks just walked in and took over, so that those Jews who stayed loyal to Judaism fought against them. Then therefore you'd say, well, what did I do wrong? All I did was go to a Greek circus. All I did was go to a Greek library. I didn't worship idols. But one thing leads to another. One is attached to the other until eventually we got to the point where most Jewish people were Hellenists. And there had to be some type of an upheaval, a revolution in order to bring people back. So it's just a hint at the same idea found in the Parsha.
It's also the bab, isn't it? Carry on with the bab, you see.
Right. Love means and.
Oh, that's right.
So now when we look a bit at Chanuka, so there's a couple of points that are really worth discussing. As I said, we would spend most of our time today talking about Chanuka. So firstly, the idea of Chanuka has one very amazing thing, of all of the things that you come across, which is the war itself. The question of the war of the Jews fighting against the Greeks is an extraordinary thing. In fact, in the prayer that we say 3 times a day in the Siddur, that we say in Hanukkah, Al HaNisim, right? All of the miracles that you did for us. And what are the miracles? The miracles are that you had the few won a war against the many. Right? The few Jews against the entire Greek world. You had the weak won a war against the strong. Who were the weak? The Jews against the great Greek army. And then you have some funny statements. You have the Tahor, the spiritually holy, won a war against the spiritually unholy. Right? The Jews against the Greeks. Now, that's you see, up until now, the fact that you have a few people fighting many people and that the few win, that's a miracle, because the many will always win against the few. If you have someone weak fighting someone strong, logic tells you the strong person will win. So if the weak person wins, that's a miracle. But where does it say that the spiritually unholy person, like the Greeks, are stronger than the spiritually holy person? Why would we think that? As a person who's spiritually holy has nothing to do with his strength, right? So why would that be the case? And that's what it says, right? And it says that the Greeks fought against those who did the Torah, and the miracle was that those who did the Torah won. right? So we have to understand what that's saying. Secondly is we have to understand the war itself, because the war was the entire world, because the Greeks had conquered the entire known world, and they had also conquered Israel, and they now wanted to come in and to make the Jews, just like everyone else in the world, they wanted them to become Hellenists, and they wanted them to pay their taxes, and they wanted them to be a part of what they were doing, and the Jews wouldn't do it. Right? So they went to war with them. So now you have this enormous army, right? Even the Greeks who fought against the Jews were from Syria. They weren't the regular, necessarily, other than the leadership, the regular Greeks that we know of. So they had this war against the Jews. So when you have a war, the Jews have a tribe that fights, right? Just like we see in the Torah, the tribe of Yehuda. They're the kings, they're the warriors, they're the military. That was the job of the tribe of Yehuda. Right? And we see that in the tribe of Yehuda does not play a role in this war. In this war against the Greeks, it was the Kohanim. It were the Hashmonim, or the Maccabees. They were Kohanim. They came from the tribe of Levi, not from the tribe of Yehuda. And you'd say, if I was going to pick anybody to fight a war against the most powerful nation in the world, I would not pick the Kohanim. The Kohanim do not spend their time training militarily. They don't know how to do anything other than perhaps use a knife to be able to shecht a cow, but they don't know how to do any violence. They spend all of their time in the temple. Their whole purpose of life is to bring peace to the world. So of all people that should be designated as the warriors to fight against the Greeks, the Kohanim are not the ones I would have picked. I would have picked the military. So why was it that it was the Kohanim that were picked? Next thing is, there's an odd thing about the Kohanim. One of the things about the Kohanim that makes them unique is the fact that there is no individuality, that they're not at all unique. That is to say, you find that in most civilizations you have you have uniforms, and the military wears a uniform. And right, you go to anywhere you go in the world, you will find an army, and an army will have a uniform. Now, there's a number of reasons for the uniform, but one of the basic reasons is so that the soldier wearing the uniform should not dress in a manner that is individual, that is based on his likes and dislikes, because the army wants that person to be able to blend themselves in as one of the group. You can't have an army with 100 individuals, because no one's going to listen. You need an army with 100 people who are part of a team. One of the ways of building that team is making everyone look the same, rather than look individual. They wore a uniform. Right? In the Jewish tradition, in the Torah, we don't find that there's a prescription in the Torah for the tribe of Yehuda when they go to war to wear a uniform. It could be they wore a uniform, right? Because they understood the military. But they did not, you don't see it, that it says that they have to. The only people that you find that has to wear a uniform are the Kohanim. They're the only ones. You look in the Torah, there's entire parshas dedicated to what a Kohen wears. And that's also odd, because why do you want the Kohanim to all be the same? Aren't they not individuals? Each one's different. Right? What's the purpose of making them blend into one group? So all of this really has one basic answer. When it says in the prayer that we say, right, 3 times a day of Al Nisim on Chanuka, and it says that the few won against the many, that's a clear physical celebration, right? We won. But when it says that the holy, or those who learn Torah, won against the others, the pagans or the ones who are unholy, that doesn't tell us about a miracle, because maybe the holy were stronger than the unholy. Who's to say that just because somebody's unholy, that logic would tell us they should win? So the point is that the war that the Greeks fought against the Jews was not a war like other wars. In other wars, the people who fought wanted to kill the people who are on their other side. In the case of the Greeks, they had no interest in killing the Jews, because the more Jews who were dead, the less taxes they're going to get. They wanted the Jews to be alive, and they wanted the Jews to be happy, successful parts of the Greek society, so they could collect more money, so they would have more people following the Greek way of life, the Hellenistic way of life. They did not want a group of people practicing another religion and not adhering to their basic ideas. But then when the Jews wouldn't do it, so the Greeks came in and declared war solely to get the Jews to not follow Judaism, not to kill them. If they could, the way the Greeks would win the war, they believed, was by converting the Jews to Hellenism, not by killing the Jews. That's how you go to war, people get killed, but that wasn't their goal. So therefore it tells us the beginning of the idea of what the answer to our question is. Because the war was not fought against the Jewish body, the Jewish person. It was fought against the Jewish soul. And who represents best the Jewish soul among the Jewish people would be the Kohanim. Because they are, the Gemara asked the question, who are the Kohanim? Are the Kohanim servants of God, like an extension of God, receiving our sacrifice on behalf of God? Or are they servants of the Jewish people, working for the Jewish people, taking their sacrifices to God? Like, what's their role? Either way, you see that they're an intermediary. Not an intermediary that we can't go directly to God. We definitely can. But to fulfill this specific ritual, they're in the middle, right? And they had a job in the middle. Either way, either as representatives of those receiving the sacrifice on behalf of God, or those on behalf of us preparing the sacrifice for God to get. Right? And then all the details of how sacrifices are done. But the fact remains that the Kohanim represent the Jewish soul, the Jewish religion. Right? They represent either God or the soul of the Jews. And therefore, the Greeks are going to go to war. It is appropriate that the ones who fought were the ones who were attacked. And it was the Kohanim who were attacked because they represent Judaism. They don't represent the Jewish body, they represent Torah. And that's what the Greeks wanted to destroy. So the Kohanim fought back. The reason that a Kohen wears a uniform, like why the Torah tells us a Kohen has to wear a uniform, is because a Kohen is not an individual. When you go to the temple, you don't say, I would like to give my sacrifice to Joe the Kohen so he could offer it. You don't. You give it to the Kohen who's there, because they're all the same. And they're made to look similar to teach you that lesson, even though they're not all the same. They are individuals, but they have to have a certain similarity among them, so they should appear to be the same, so that you should relate to all the Kohanim on the same way. Yeah, one isn't preferred over another. By doing that, the Kohanim lose their individuality. They're not 100 men who happen to be Kohanim. They are Kohanim, who are 100 Kohanim, and they're all the same. And that's because when they went to war, it wasn't a war against the Kohen, it was a war against Judaism. So there, the individual Kohen was not fighting the war as the individual. He was fighting representing the Jewish soul. So therefore, it had to be that they had to be part of that group. They weren't individuals in this case. But we understand now that the war against the Jews in the case of the Greeks was really a war against Judaism. Representing the Jews in the case of war is the tribe of Yehuda. But representing the Jews in a war on Judaism are those who represent Judaism. That was the Kohanim. So it made perfect sense that the Kohanim in their uniforms would be the ones who go to war. So now when it says that the unclean fighting against the clean, that is to say the Greeks who were unclean is not a good word. It's really who have a lack of spiritual understanding and adherence, fighting against those who have it. It's not that if you are a spiritual person, you're weaker than somebody who's not at all. But what's miraculous is that in the world that we live in, it appears that those people who dedicate themselves to the physical world do seem to get ahead, more so than those people who dedicate their lives in the spiritual world. That's not to say that people who are spiritually oriented can't be wealthy. They can be, and we see many examples of it. But logic says that if you work 1 day a week, you will make less money than if you work 2 days a week. If you sell something at a reasonable price, you'll make less money than if you sell it for an exorbitant price. The Torah tells us you have to sell things at a reasonable price. The Torah says you can only work 6 days a week. The Torah says you can only do certain things and not other things. The person who doesn't follow that is going to be in the physical world. Logic tells you more successful. They're not necessarily, but logic would say that. And therefore, logic says that the spiritually impure will be able to, in the physical world, accomplish their goal of destroying Judaism rather than the Jews being able to win. And the fact that the Jews are able to win using the Kohanim is a miracle in of itself. Because we have to understand that, you could imagine that what is it for the Kohanim to go to war with the Greek army? It's like today having a superpower like the United States, and the the chartered accountants of Canada go to war with the United States. But you have chartered accountants are not military. There's not that many of them. And they're going to go to war with the most powerful nation in the world, and they're going to win. That's what happened in the story of the Greeks attacking the Jews. The Greeks attacked the Jews. It was the army of the Kohanim, who have no understanding necessarily of the military, went to war against them because it was a fight against their beliefs. Right? So it's like the chartered accountants going to war against the United States. There's no way they could win. So therefore, every aspect of that war was miraculous, and that's why we say it this way in the prayer 3 times a day. But what we don't necessarily understand always is, why is it that when you and I celebrate Hanukkah, we celebrate it by lighting a menorah, and we have 8 days, and we have this oil, and we put it in, and we remember the miracle of the oil. But there's no discussion of the miracle of the oil in the prayer. Al Nisim, we say, God, thank you for the miracles and for saving us and for helping us and for continuing us, the few against the many, the weak against the strong, the observant against the non-observant, the Torah studiers against those who were pagans. Thank you for doing that. It doesn't say, and oh, by the way, thank you for making the oil burn for 8 days. It doesn't say that. Why is it that when we celebrate Hanukkah with what seems to be an inconsequential miracle? Okay, it's a miracle. Right? So there's no such thing as inconsequential miracle. But compared to the other ones, it's like celebrating on Pesach the going out of Egypt. We're not going to celebrate the going out of Egypt. We're going to celebrate that when we made matzah, it didn't get spoiled. That's what we're going to celebrate. We're celebrating that on the way out of Egypt, we made matzah and it didn't get spoiled. That's not, what is that? Okay, it's a miracle, right? Maybe it wouldn't have worked, it shouldn't have worked. But to say that's the story of Passover, not at all. So why would we say that the story of Hanukkah is lighting these oil that burns for 8 days instead of 1 day? And yet the prayer that we say in our benching and 3 times a day does not even mention it. So the difference is that the purpose of the oil, the miracle of the oil, was really for the people living in those days more so than anything else. Because the people living in those days had all of these miracles happening, but not until they got to the end, when they actually had this miracle of the oil that burnt for 8 days rather than 1 day, which showed them that everything that they had done, this and this and this and this, that they had done from the beginning to the end, was correct. That they stood up to the Greeks, they fought against the Greeks, everything that they did was right. That last final miracle gave them the ability to see that and then use hindsight to understand it. The Gemara gives us an example, for instance, but I'll update the example. Let's look at it historically. You know that during the days of the Crusaders, what was the purpose of the Crusaders? They said they were going to go to Israel to liberate Israel from the heathens, really from the Arabs, right, who were in charge of Israel. On the way, they attacked every single Jewish community and killed, raped, pillaged every Jewish community that they could between France, Italy, England, and Israel. And thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, I don't know, but significant numbers of Jewish people were raped, murdered, destroyed, stolen from, right? Totally lost because of the Crusades. So the Crusades were not this wondrous, great thing. They were a horrible time for us. However, one of the things that happened during the time of the Crusades was the cholera epidemic. The cholera epidemic, which swept through Western Europe, right, in the countries where these people came from, killed people, so many people. Right? It was a horrible thing. And this epidemic just went through everyone. But the Jews didn't get it. In general, the Jews didn't get it. And mostly it was because our lifestyle was different. First thing is, we were separate from the non-Jews. We didn't live with them. Secondly, as we bathed, we cleaned ourselves, which non-Jews at that time did not. They felt it was an scientific understanding then that bathing made you weak. So that's why they wore such strong perfumes to cover odors. That's why they wore powdered wigs to cover odors. Everything was for that. So the Jews, we know, you want to go to the mikveh, you have to bathe. Right? You want to get ready for Shabbat, you have to bathe. So our whole lifestyle was different, and so then, according to the physical world, we would have a less chance of getting this disease. We weren't with them who had it, and we lived differently. Suddenly, we have to understand. Here, God makes a miracle. Those people who are trying to kill us with the Crusades are dying from a plague. Right? They're dying. So it's clearly a miracle that God made in order to help the Jewish people. But then what happens? A number of the Christians who are being killed suddenly come to the realization that the Jews are not being killed. And they decide that it's got to be because the Jews are causing it. The Jews are making this happen. The Jews are poisoning our wells. They're putting poison into our wells. We're drinking the water and we're getting sick. The Jews know, so they're not drinking the water. Right? So here we have God makes a miracle in order to help the Jews, and then the miracle itself becomes a plague. Because now what do? They go out and they kill more Jews because the Jews cause us to die. Not only are the Jews bad guys because they're Jewish, but they also cause this epidemic. So therefore we're going to go after them even harder. So why was that? So the rabbis of that time thought about that question. And we find writings that say that the Jews lived in the time of the Crusades. There were many miracles that went on. Many things that God did to help them. The most easy one to see is this epidemic. This epidemic happened because it was to help save Jews. Right? God wanted to help save them, so he caused this epidemic. But the Jews did not necessarily take to heart the depth of this miracle. And therefore they were the same. They didn't necessarily change. They didn't necessarily become different people because they saw the hand of God save their life. Because we would all say, if God would, I'm driving down the road and I get into a skid. God, if you save me, I'll do anything, right? But God saved them, and nothing happened. Like they acted the same. So the commentaries that I read said, so therefore God said, you don't recognize my miracle, then the miracle will become a curse. And it became a curse, and more Jews died because of it. That's the same idea in the story of Chanuka. In the story of Chanuka, all of these miracles happened. The few fought a war and won against the many. All of these things are going on, right? And the Jews aren't necessarily recognizing it. They became Hellenists. Right? Many of the people who fought for the Greeks were Jews against the Jews, because so many Jews had converted already to Hellenism by the time this happened. The people did not realize the hand of God in what was going on in the story of Hanukkah. So in the end, God made a very obvious, clear miracle, and with the intent that they have to see this, and that because of it they have to realize what they did was right, and they have to change, they have to improve themselves. And that happened. So therefore the miracle of the oil, even though it's a miracle that we celebrate, was really a miracle for the people of those days. The miracles of the war, even though it saved their lives, the prayers tell us that it was a miracle for the ages, for us. So when we pray to God and we give him praise for the story of Hanukkah, for what happened, we praise him for the miracles that he did to save the lives of the Jewish people and to save the soul of the Jewish people. That's what was significant to us. The oil being burnt has a symbolic meaning to us, but as a miracle it has a meaning mostly to those people who lived then, because that finally brought them to the realization that all of these things that happened up until now were all miraculous. That the fact that we're able to be in the temple today and light this menorah means that there were many miracles that went on to bring us here. We were a small group of untrained military fighting against the most powerful nation in the world, and we won. And yet they didn't necessarily understand that until they finally got to that last point and the oil burnt for 8 days. So they understood at that point how significant that is, while originally they didn't necessarily understand all of the miracles that had happened. And that's really the significance of why we celebrate by lighting the menorah, but we thank God for the wars. That's what we're really thanking him for, because those are lessons that we learn. The last one was more so a lesson for them. So that's why that's the case. That's not to say that the message of the oil and the meaning of the nights of Hanukkah and all of the significance within the menorah and every aspect of it is not significant. It's very significant. There's a lot we can learn from it. And we know from Tehillim, from the Psalms, that the soul of man is the candle of God. Right, that a candle represents the neshama, the soul. That's what was saved during Hanukkah. Right, so there's a relationship with that. The oil is like the Torah, which feeds us, that nourishes our soul. And it says the wick, the flame, is the intervention of God into our lives. So there's many symbols for it, right, that give us meaning. But therefore we can learn from this miracle. That's why we light the menorah, because to us it's the spreading of light into a world of darkness. It is not a coincidence that Hanukkah celebrated in the time when the night is the longest and the day is the shortest. That I understand in the southern hemisphere it's the opposite, but when these things are looked at, it's looked at what is it like in Israel. in the northern hemisphere. And in Israel, in the northern hemisphere, this is the shortest days of the year. We are now in the midst. This week that we're in right now is the shortest week of the year, as far as shortest meaning shortest amount of daylight. It gets dark. It gets light late in the morning, and it gets dark early in the afternoon. So the amount of hours of daylight are gone. We understand that Torah is light. Torah is the light, right? And darkness symbolizes evil, and darkness symbolizes the world outside of us. While the Greeks themselves believed that they were the light to the world because they gave philosophy to the world, they changed the way that many things happened in the world, and that when we look back on the Greeks, the secular world looks back at the Greeks as being a brilliant nation that caused many positive things to happen. Right? That's how they see it. We see them as total darkness. The Greeks to us are total darkness, because they took the soul out of the world and said that a person is a body, and the body is perfect, and there's no reason to have a circumcision because the body is perfect. They would have their Olympics, and the Olympics were done without clothing, right? Not with uniforms. They were done without clothing because the human body is perfect. We say that the world needs completion. The world has a spiritual side. They only saw this physical side. Therefore, symbolically, Hanukkah is always in the time when the darkness is the longest, which is symbolizing the influence of the Greeks. So we light these little lights to push away the darkness, to destroy the darkness in that area, and that's symbolized by the flame of our neshama, was what the Greeks tried to put out. It's also another symbol is that we know that the Jews in general are symbolized by the moon, right? Because we understand the moon gets larger and smaller. The Jews have times where we have more power, more authority. We have times when we have less authority, right? We know that our holidays are judged by the moon, where our calendar is judged by the moon. So the moon has significance to us. The other world, the outside of us, uses the sun. Right? Therefore, we understand the summertime is really the time that's not the best time for Jews. It's a time where there's a lot of immodesty. It's a time when the day is very long, the night is very short. We symbolize the night, right? That's where the moon is. The rest of the world symbolizes in the day. The winter time is the time for us where the night is long, symbolizing the Jewish people, and the day is shorter. And therefore, any rabbinic holidays that we have are always done at a time when the night is longer and the day is shorter. The Purim and Chanuka are done at that time, right? Tisha B'Av, which shows the destruction of the Jewish Commonwealth, is in the middle of the summer, where the days are long and the nights are short, symbolizing the opposite influences. So Hanukkah also happening at this time shows us we're at the beginning of the new millennium, or the new beginning. Because what happens right now, starting in the next few days, the days are going to start getting longer. Maybe a minute a week, maybe 5 minutes a week, but it's going to start changing. And it's like the hope for us. We see that things are going to start, there's going to be a change. So the light that we bring into the world sort of like turns on a new light for the world. Not the sun of the physical world, but the light of the candles bringing into the new day. And another symbol we get from last week's Parsha with it, of course, is the night symbolizes the dispersion, the galut, are being sent out from Israel. That was the idea of Yaakov wrestling with the angel throughout the night. Because here the Jews and the non-Jews are wrestling. The goodness and evil is wrestling throughout the night, the dispersion, when we're sent out into the world through the dark night. Right? In the end, when it becomes daytime, Yaakov is supreme. He wins in that fight. So we also have an idea that nighttime is symbolic of this gullus. So the light of our Hanukkah candles push away that so that ultimately we'll be able to have the Messianic era come. Right? That's the basis of it, where it comes from. And we have a number of references to that. For instance, the number of candles that we use for the holiday is not 8. Of course, you use 8, and then you use 7, and you use 6, and you use 5 every day, right? Every day, one day you use 1, the next day you use 2, so it's 1 plus 2, the next day is 3, is 1, 2 plus 3. The numbers add up. So we have a numeric value of a similarity between the word of Mashiach and the word of Nachash, which is the same letters that you find on the dreidel. Right, Nachash is the same letters that you find on it. So No, that's the numeric value of the letters on the dreidel, and Nachas, and Mashiach as well. And you see on the one side, Nachas representing the Yetzer Hara, the evilness in the world, the darkness in the world. And Mashiach brings the light. Chanuka is the time when we begin to come out of the darkness into the light, using the candles of the Torah that we light. So we have many allusions for Hanukkah, and there's many, many, many issues like that. But the important thing I think that we need to keep in mind is the idea of the importance of the miraculous saving of the Jewish people because of the war to save our souls, and that's the real basis of what Hanukkah is for us. And it is not a coincidence that Hanukkah falls at the time of the largest celebration of the non-Jewish world. The non-Jewish world celebrates this time of year with many, many occasions, right? In fact, being a Jew in North America, regardless of how observant you are, just walking outside, it will affect you. You know, you walk into the mall, you have all these songs, the music is all about their holiday. People talk about their holiday. They dress based on their holiday. They act differently, right? Not just people in the stores. People on the streets act differently. There's a different spirit of their holidays, and there's no way that a Jew is not going to be affected by it, right? It affects us. That idea of our being a few people in a big world that is not believed like us, and yet we have to influence them, is exactly the story of what Hanukkah is. The fact that if you go to the average Jewish kid, even with a Jewish education, they can recite for you Christmas carols. Right? We all know them because we hear them so much. Right? It's a part of who we are almost. Because as much as it might bother us, it's a part of it. But yet, because we are a minority in a majority world, and no matter where we are, that's how it is. And the story of Hanukkah is the story of being able to stand up and to say that even as a minority, we are supposed to influence the world. We are a light to the world. And therefore, that it's not a coincidence that at this time, when there's so much, the world there's a desire to assimilate us, to bring us in. Look how nice it is, and we have this beautiful tree and these presents, and everybody's nice and friendly, and they all care about each other, and you have wonderful stories and these terrific movies about how people help each other and so on and so forth. The idea, the bottom line is, the purpose of that is to assimilate us. The purpose of Hanukkah is to not allow that to happen. That's what Hanukkah means. That's why it's such an odd thing when you read about Jews who will celebrate non-Jewish holidays. They'll put a Christmas tree in their home, for instance. And a Jew does such a thing, they are doing the exact opposite of what Hanukkah stands for. To take a Christmas tree and call it a Hanukkah bush, or to put both in one's house, is exactly what the Hellenistic Jews did. They were born Jewish, they were traditionally Jewish, they had Jewish customs, Jewish lifestyle, Jewish clothing, but they believed in Hellenism. It's exactly the same thing that happens today. Hanukkah is a message to us throughout the ages. Yet we need to be able to stand up for our beliefs, we have to be strong in our beliefs, and we can't allow the outside world to influence us to give those beliefs up. Right? That's what happened in the story of Hanukkah, and that's how we were able to win, because we were not prepared to give it up. So it's not a coincidence that it falls at the same time of year, in order to give us that strength and that ability to be able to stand up to the outside world and say, no, we're not going to let you influence us. We're not going to raise our kids with St. Nicholas and Spider-Man. We're going to teach your kids about goodness and kindness and charity and what it really means and how it really applies all year. That's our job in the world, to teach the world of these things, not for us to learn the negatives. So that's what the story of Hanukkah really gives to us all. It gives us that ability to be able to stand up to the world and to let them know that we're not going to change. And we're not going to give in. We're going to remain the people we are. So that's really just a few thoughts about Hanukkah. And I guess we better stop. The time's up.